This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our bonus video, which will be featuring my dear friend, Brad McEntire. Now, Brad McEntire is a playwright and an actor. He is the artistic director behind the Audacity Theatre Lab, which I believe is where I first met you, was I went to one of your performances there. And he's also the founder of the Dallas Solo Fest, which is a wonderful event that happens in Dallas. You've written plays such as I Brought Home a Chupacabra, Dinosaur and the Robot Stop a Train, and Raspberry Fizz. I'm looking on your website right now if you can't tell. But in particular, the ones that I remember the best are your one-person shows, Cyrano a Go-Go and Chop, and many others. You are also an educator. So Brad, thank you so much for making time for this class.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, now you and I also have something else in common, that I would both put us in the category of Shakespeare nerds.
Yeah, that's fair. That's pretty fair.
Now, what was your sort of first exposure to Shakespeare? Mine's a little embarrassing, but I'll start with you. How did you first get into Shakespeare?
Well, I encountered Shakespeare, I don't know, back when I was in junior high, maybe.
Yeah.
I remember seeing some productions around town, and I did not understand them. I did not quite figure out what was happening. There's a local solo performer here in Dallas named Fred Kerchak, and I don't know if he still performs them, but he used to perform one-person versions of some of the Shakespeare plays, like The Tempest and A Midsummer Night's Dream, and so on. And I remember, and it had a lot of puppets and shadows and special effects and mannequin heads and things like that. And so that was one of the first ones I went to see, and I had no idea what was happening. I liked it quite a bit, but if you had asked me afterwards what it was about, I would not have been able to tell you. Then when I got to college, I took a class on Shakespeare, and the teacher expected us to read a play a week come in and be able to discuss it. And I completely was in over my head, and I ended up listening to them on records, which will date me horribly. I checked vinyl records out from the library at the campus and would follow along in the text. And and I barely kept up with that class, by the way. I barely kept up with that class. But the side effect was I got exposed to this kind of vast array of plays that kind of spanned all these different situations, all these different kind of human emotions and everything. And that was the first time I started to see, oh, I see why this Shakespeare guy is, everybody talks about this guy. Okay. So yeah, since then I'm now in the theater. My career has been kind of centered around the theater, and Shakespeare, of course, weighs prominently in the theater. So he comes up a lot, and it's only as I've inching into middle age that I've actually started to really pay attention to the holes in my knowledge, and not just for Shakespeare, but for a lot of things, but including Shakespeare. I've been trying to kind of fill in the gaps and well, what are those lesser known plays about? And what are, what's the actual voice of Shakespeare? What did he actually do on a day-to-day basis? And how did he conduct himself? So that's kind of how I've slowly become interested in him. What about you? How did you get exposed to him?
Well, it was the 90s, and Mel Gibson was kind of a big deal in the 90s. So yeah, it was the Zeffirelli Hamlet that really got me into it. But yeah, I mean, as I said, so I have to apologize for my Mel Gibson fandom back in the day. I didn't know. But he was so cool. I was a nerdy little kid, and Mel Gibson.
That's still a good movie, though. That's still a good movie. I mean, we can wear a little badge of shame to say it, but it's still a good movie. Like it's not a horrible adaptation of it though.
I've seen some bad adaptations, and so when I go back to Zeffirelli, I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a pass. This one's actually pretty good. And the stuff that Glenn Close did, I thought with the character was really interesting. And yeah, it holds up. But yeah, I remember like there was that Braveheart, Hamlet, like Mel Gibson kind of was. He was in
he was
peak.
all over the place for a while. Yeah.
So, but
there seems to be in the late 90s where there was this big boom of like Shakespeare movies.
Yes, there was. Yeah.
Yeah. Like from like the all through the 90s, like all the Kenneth Branagh big ones kind of hit, and Trevor Nunn was making stuff, and like all these kind of Shakespeare was kind of in the ethos.
Yeah. Which is
10 Things I Hate About You. Like
yes. Well, and the interesting thing, you kind of brought it up, is a lot of people, when you talk about Shakespeare, their experiences of Shakespeare aren't necessarily stage plays. It's I saw a movie, or it's I saw some one-person show, or I saw like a shadow puppet theater of it, or I listened to a record of his recordings, or for a lot of us, it's I read it because I had to in class. But it is funny that someone who looms so large in the world of theater, I would say many people don't actually ever experience Shakespeare on the stage.
Yeah, it's possible to go your whole life without seeing the Shakespeare plays performed, like as they were meant to be performed on a stage. But that's I don't know if that's Shakespeare's fault so much as it's probably just the practicality of the theater. Like if you think of theater in comparison to other mediums, it's getting large audiences to see plays as opposed to say a movie is very difficult. It has like kind of the curse of locality to it. So
yeah, I would agree. And the thing about Shakespeare, and I even said this to the class, is you can dive. Those are some deep waters when it comes to Shakespeare. And I gave everyone permission. You don't have to watch Cymbeline. Like you can pass that one. Pericles, the two noble kids. I'm like, you're
Simon
good.
of Athens. That's a hit. That's a blockbuster, David. That's a blockbuster. Come on.
Yeah. So I tend to stick to the ones that may have been required reading at some point, and we'll dabble in a few others. But what I'm really interested in talking with you about is we don't know much about Shakespeare's life. I mean, there's a lot of conjecture. His dad was a glover, and then we like try to extrapolate what that means and how it impacted Shakespeare's life to be adjacent to the gloving industry. And like there's all this stuff, like just with little tidbits we know about his mom. But there's one thing that we do know about Shakespeare, is that he was an actor.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a point that a lot of people seem to jump over or skip past. And I'll put the video in the notes below, but you did a video actually where you read a book called Shakespeare the Player, and it was written by John Southworth. And I would just be, I'm not expecting you to remember something you read several years ago, but what for you?
Thank God.
What for you is the importance of knowing that like Shakespeare was an actor, and almost actor first and foremost?
Well, it brings with it a couple of I would say assumptions, but they're not assumptions. You would think that they would be kind of part and parcel with the job, but until you say it out loud, sometimes people don't realize the actors are the people that are in the field. Like if you work at a job and your manager like sits behind a desk and like tells you like do this, arbitrary choice, arbitrary decision, and then you, the worker, have to go on the floor and make it happen. The actors are the people that they're on the stage while it is being performed for an audience, and very quickly know if this is working or not working. And sometimes, and it's still true of Shakespeare plays, and Shakespeare play for as awesome as he is, he doesn't have very many like just really super tight masterpieces that have nothing wrong with them. Like there's always little things where you're like, oh, I don't know, that's is that a happy ending? Like so the actor does a lot, some of the heavy lifting, which I imagine they did during the time period to make it stage worthy, basically, to make it presentable for the audience. There's a lot of things that can be shown on stage that don't necessarily show up on the page, perhaps. So I don't know, like in Two Gentlemen of Verona at the end, where if I remember the character, like the Proteus character, like kind of attacks the Sylvia or Julie. I don't remember all the names, David, but I'm remembering the end of the play, and it's problematic because it's kind of quasi-rapey, and he apologizes to his friend, but not to the girl he attacked. In fact, she doesn't say anything for the rest of the show. But when I would read through, if I were reading that as a performer, I'd be like, oh, that if I were seeing that in performance, she'd probably smack him.
Yeah.
Like, and she would show her anger rather than saying something out loud. And I wonder if Shakespeare, because he was writing for his group of actors, kind of had that in the back of his mind.
We had talked about this, and this is where this scene goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so, and yeah, I'm sure throughout the class you guys are talking about the structures and how Shakespeare kind of like didn't obey the genres all the time and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think some of that stuff can be corrected through the performance. And I think that's one of the reasons actors like to do these plays. And I think being an actor and being on the stage, Shakespeare could kind of see what worked and what didn't. There's also some degree in some of the parts where it's slightly actor proof, which is a thing that playwrights sometimes have to worry about, of like, I wrote it this way, but then the actor will choose some weird choice, and you sometimes have to write it to kind of direct the actor to like make a stronger choice than they maybe otherwise wouldn't. And Shakespeare's plays are actually pretty good. Like I think of that scene in Midsummer Night's Dream where the lovers are encountering each other in the forest, and the flower's been rubbed on their eyes, and the whole like, what do you call me, a poppet, and you are low but little, and they have this thing where Helena thinks they're making fun of her, and Hermia is jealous, and they start kind of fighting, bickering back and forth. And I always read that scene thinking to myself, this is so good for an actor to do.
Yeah.
For this group of actors who are otherwise romantic leads, and then they have this kind of slapsticky, wonderfully over the top kind of conflict scene in the play where they get to kind of shine. So I think Shakespeare, being an actor himself, could be inside the work and kind of figure out, like, does this have legs? Like, and what do I need to maybe adjust? And can this be done in performance? It doesn't have to show up on the page so much.
Well, and I think that I'm really glad you talked about the Midsummer Night's Dream example. I've seen a few different performances of Midsummer Night's Dream, and for whatever reason, that scene that you mentioned, it always works. It always, I've never seen it done badly. Like, and that's a weird thing to say about a scene, but for whatever reason, it hits. It hits just right.
Yeah. It's like pure, like, wonderful conflict. Like, just the characters they literally go at each other, and the lines kind of correspond with like the actions.
Yeah.
And if the actors just say the words clearly, they're doing half the job. And so, to Shakespeare's credit, it lends itself to being, very engaging and stuff to watch. But I think he figured that out because he he was a man of the theater, like
Yeah.
just in a kind of an all-purpose way. And I think he didn't separate those things. I think as a writer, he had in his mind, like, here's who's going to perform in it, and here's how I need it to kind of play. And I know the ramifications and practicalities of the stage and where the audience is going to be sitting, and what the technical things I have at my disposal are. And so he didn't write it and go, here, you guys just take it over and make it happen.
Good luck.
He was part of the people that made it happen, and it had that kind of insider knowledge. And I think that helps, like through the ages, that has helped the plays kind of stay performable. Mm-hmm. Especially like the fact that it's, some of them are problematic, like, and structurally wonky and all that kind of stuff. So like, I'm like the performability of it, he had an insider's kind of like inside baseball kind of view of it.
Yeah. Well, and I even think, one thing that's really interesting is if you look at some of the early quartos, the printed pamphlets of some of his works, you can see changes that he made between that version, which was published during his lifetime, and then later corrected versions that appear in the first folio. And I was looking it up, but if you take the to be or not to be speech, the original printed version is to be or not to be, there's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? All. That's the line. And I imagine, and this is just a guess, but I'm guessing as a performer, he was watching people perform that soliloquy and going, it's not working. Like something about that is not hitting right. And then he changes it to be or not to be, that is the question. And then he goes, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slain, so then we get to that. And I'm sure that as an actor, he discovered that seeing it on the stage and going, and that's one of the things as writers, we don't always get to go back to our work and change it. But as a playwright, like he was under no obligation to keep the original version the way it was. Like, who knows, maybe even some of the actors may have begged him to be like, please change this part. I hate saying this line.
I have a costume change, Will. I have a costume change. I got to get off and I got to go get the dog. I got to bring Crab on, or so no, you're right. It was very organic. I get this impression. I mean, we don't know, but I get this impression that it was very organic. I mean, even the collected works in the folio didn't Hemmings and Kondo collect them from the actors in some cases, and and what the actors remember, or what the script parts that they had, the scrolls that they kind of carried around. So it wasn't stuck. I also remember this when people do Shakespeare nowadays, when directors or actors are performing or doing a production of Shakespeare. There's this kind of like, we put kind of Shakespeare up on a pedestal, and we're like don't mess with his work, but you almost do him a disservice if you don't take a really close look and perhaps cut it or speed things up or show things in different ways, because it's an organic. Theater is very organic. Like it's not stuck like usual literature on the page. It's meant to be up on its feet. So I sometimes people I wouldn't cut Shakespeare. We're doing it the real way it's done, and I'm like, well, are you sure you want to do that? Because
it's going to be 3 hours wonderfully long.
Yeah, like how much time you got in your life, and it's kind of made in order to facilitate this kind of organic approach to it, this more fluid approach to it, and different times and places need different things from the plays. The wonderful thing is they're so adaptable. They're so there's so much room for interpretation in it, like built into it. And again, that's kind of part and parcel with that performability that he put in there. So.
Well, and I even would recommend, if you ever get a chance, it's interesting to sometimes sit with a Shakespeare script on your lap while watching a performance, like on TV or whatever. I wouldn't take one to the playhouse, but it is interesting because very rarely will you find a performance that follows Shakespeare's work verbatim, like as it is on the page. Like everyone abbreviates, mixes things up, turns things around,
Yeah.
reorder. It
Yeah.
just, you're not always going to get, like, it's not like this sort of holy scripture where it must be this way. Everyone messes with it.
Yeah. And it's a given. And it's weird. Like nowadays, like as a playwright myself and a contemporary like writer, if people were going to say, like, people took a red pen to my work to put it on stage, I'm still alive, and I'd be like, hey, you just do it the way I wrote it, and then we'll talk about it. After that, we'll see if there's some room for you to add some stuff on. But Shakespeare, and I think this goes for most older works, like anything, beyond a couple of decades back, there's this kind of like, well, time marches on,
Yeah.
and if it's truly a classic, it will have built in that kind of fluidity, and can be cut and can be played with. So,
well, and one thing I want to kind of ask you, that you talk about, kind of moving to the present day. You are both a playwright and an actor, and of course, this class is for writers. And so I just want to ask you, as an actor, how has that helped you with your writing?
It's helped a lot, actually. Here's the thing. I don't consider them their own camps. They get kind of combined together. And it's something that Shakespeare, I think, did quite a bit. Like I think of him as a man of the theater. Like everyone through history thinks of him as a playwright. And so if you're a writer, then you come at him as a writer. If you're a manager of a theater, you come at it as a manager of a theater. If you're a historian, you come from that direction. If you're an actor, to some degree, you come at it in that way as well. But I always think of him as a man of the theater, and I don't think this is a personal theory, so I don't know, but I don't think he saw a separation in the this play has to be produced. It has to be put on its feet. I need to write it down so other people can see it and perform it. And it's got to be put on for an audience. And here's the budget I have to do it. And here's the days, the deadlines that are set out for me. And all those things kind of work together. So as an actor who works on the stories, it pulls as an actor, it helps a lot, because actors sometimes, not always to their benefit, and it's not always the case, this is a big generalization, David, but actors often focus exclusively on their part in the play. And sometimes as a director, I wish that's all that they would do, but they don't sometimes see the bigger picture. They're worried about looking cool, basically. They're worried about like upholding their at the end of the bargain. And so they might play the character, perhaps not seeing the bigger themes, perhaps not leaning into like some patterns that might be forming. But as a writer, of course, writes a play differently than an actor reads a play. And both of those things are different than how an audience would interpret it, because they sit through it in real time and see it for like one time straight through. So, you can spend months and months working on something and like thinking you're all subtle and nuanced, and then the actor could come along and obliterate it, and none of it gets translated to the audience. So, working on the creation of the piece, and then for lack of a better way of saying it, the distribution of the piece on stage as an actor, these things are kind of symbiotic. So I feel that it's helped me because I pay attention to the bigger story, and then as an actor, I can get on the granular, like the word's granular. That's
Yeah.
a word, right?
Oh yeah, I think.
Yeah, on the granular level, like I get the kind of microcosmic view of it, and then go back out to, take in the rest of it, like the bigger picture once again. And so keeping that kind of macro, micro kind of view of it, the perspective, I think helps in the storytelling. I think it helps in how it is translated to the audience. So yeah, it's been beneficial. So.
Well, and I always find it interesting, like when people will ask writers, like, which character in the story is you? And my answer is always all of them. They're all me. Like, there's no character in the things that I write that is not me. It's all me, because as I'm writing, I'm acting it out. And sometimes, like, literally, like, I'm doing voices while I'm crouched over the keyboard because I'm trying to talk it out. And I've got a way that I talk in a certain, and if you were to watch me writing at 1 o'clock at night, you'd think that I'd lost my mind, because I'm having this sort of multi-person conversation with myself. And I'm not an actor, but as a writer, I am acting.
Yeah, it's strange that we sometimes read off the page the way we may speak in real life. I mean, sometimes the page offers a lot more flexibility because it's a one-on-one experience. Like reading something off the page, you and the author have the connection, as the reader and the author. And so there's a little bit room to play there, but I think it always kind of comes back to, like, I have a 5-year-old son, and reading something out loud to him is always like another dimension to the work. Like if I pick up a book to read to him, there's the book, and eventually he could read the book on his own. But reading it out loud, I'm noticing while I'm reading the book as his dad, like, hey, this has got some stuff in it right here, or this doesn't work so much out loud. Like, but we weirdly think the way we speak sometimes. Yeah, I think that's a thing. I think, and I do the same thing. I think a lot of writers do that, where they just talk it out, talk it out. And I think Shakespeare, I mean, there's this hypothesis that he played these roles in his own plays. I mean, he was an actor as part of the Lord Chamberlain's Men and the King's Men, with his acting group. We have record logs of him performing in, Ben Jonson plays and other works. And in his own plays, academically, I think they're still out on exactly what roles he played, but I think we have hypothesized over the years that he played like the ghost in Hamlet, like Hamlet Senior, and he played like either the friar or the prince in Romeo and Juliet. He might have played Duke Theseus or Theseus in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and then Duke Theseus again in the Two Noble Kinsmen. But what these roles all have in common is they're the kind of parts where you can kind of come in, have an authoritative role, and then disappear for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think as a playwright, there were no directors at the time. There's no position in the theater called a director until like the 1870s. In the theater, a director is a relatively recent creation, but that's not to say people didn't do that work.
Yeah.
Like do similar work in the theater. And I had a feeling, because his name is on it and money's at stake, he probably kept a close eye on the performance. And because he wrote the plays for the acting company, I believe that he really kept track of like what he wanted to see on stage and how he wanted it to play. And so he played parts maybe in his own plays And I think this theory holds water, but I of course it's not. It's circumstantial evidence. But he played roles that where he could be on stage for a short amount of time, but have some kind of authoritative observational kind of power in the play, make a little impact, and then step off and watch, like from a directorial point of view. So, and I just think that's interesting. I think he's never like the star. Like, we don't have any records of him playing, Hamlet or Lear or even Prospero. Like, we don't have any records of him playing these parts himself, like the big parts, the big star featured parts. But we think he played like the utilitarian, oftentimes kind of authoritative kind of characters, the authority characters, that just kind of pop in at the end and the beginning or something, or like throughout here and there. I always think it's interesting. As the creator of the piece, he's kind of like the puppet master character in the play. Like,
yeah, I like the idea, and it's just a little thought in my head, but I do like the idea that as Friar Lawrence, if he did play that part, he would be spending a lot of his time with Juliet, which would have been played by one of the younger members of the cast. And Juliet has quite a few lines. So for a younger actor, you would be really taking on quite a large chunk. So I just imagine as Friar Lawrence, him gently whispering lines to the actor as they're trying to work through the part.
Like prompting them.
Yeah, but I'm like right there,
That's not it. Go do it again. Do it again. Yeah.
You're right there as Juliet is trying his best to do the lines.
It also, if it's true, it illustrates a neat point in that he, as an actor, he wasn't hogging the spotlight.
Yeah.
He was writing for his like skill set. And if his skill set was just playing these kind of, because I'm like, I don't know, the Duke Theseus in the beginning of A Midsummer Night's Dream is not the showy part.
No.
Like, it's kind of setting up that there's a wedding and he's going to get married, and then at the end he makes some kind of witty comments about the mechanicals doing the play, but like there's no, I mean, it's not the, bless anybody that gets Theseus in a production. I think they often double cast it nowadays with
Oberon, right?
Oberon, but it's not. He's not trying to hog the spotlight. He's trying to make the production good. Like, he's trying to make sure everybody's playing their parts, including him. Yeah. And I think that's kind of refreshing, that the work should benefit more than the worker, like the play instead of the player. And I give Shakespeare credit for that, because it's not always the way it goes. Like, some people write plays and want to be the star of the plays. Like, and when I write multi-person plays, I kind of keep that in the back of my mind. I'm like, okay, what do I really need to be the star of this, or can I, if I'm in my play at all, what's my role, and how can I keep an eye on it, and make sure I serve the play instead of the play serving me.
Well, I've got one more question, because I think we are right at time. But I do have one more question for you, and as just a blanket, this is a choose your favorite child question. Do you have a favorite Shakespeare play?
Yes. By process of elimination, really.
It's Cymbeline, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, no, it's Pericles, it's Coriolanus. So probably my favorite. I'm going to answer your question two ways.
All right.
My favorite as a writer,
okay,
is Othello. I think Othello is super tight. In fact, I think most productions cut very little out, because there's not a lot of fat on that play.
I'd agree. Yeah.
And I would say the same thing about the twins.
Comedy of Errors.
Comedy of Errors.
Yeah.
I think comedy, and of course it was the unities as well. But like, I think it doesn't have a lot of fat on it.
Yeah.
As a writer, those two are my favorite as a writer. As a performer, and what I like to see on stage, and I think is fun to play, is what we mentioned earlier, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Mm-hmm. I think A Midsummer Night's Dream is delightful. Like, it's
so much
just
fun.
So fun to do and to watch. And everybody, like even Theseus, like we're just giving him a hard time, but like even Theseus has some little showy bits in it, and the mechanicals and the whole comment on actors, like the kind of meta comment on people performing in a play, I think is just fantastic. And I mean, he does it in other plays, like he does it in Hamlet, and he does it in one of the other comedies. But in Midsummer Night's Dream, I absolutely love that showing at the end. Like the whole fifth act's kind of weirdly tagged on.
It is, because like, it doesn't follow the typical structure. Yeah.
But it's so delightful. Like I mean, even the epilogue where Puck comes out, like you could end the play with Oberon going, "Hey, spirits, go through and make everybody's night wonderful." End of story. Yeah. But Puck still comes out at the end, if we spirits have offended, kind of thing at the end. Yeah. It doesn't even need to be there, but it's so good. Like, it's so nice to watch and so fun to be in. And that's a thing we won't get off on a whole conversation about it, but sometimes I do improvisation on stage, like long form improv. And a lot of times improv is more fun for the improvisers to do than it is for people to watch people trying to do improv. And I'm very aware of it when I'm doing improv. I'm like, make sure the audience has a good time first and foremost, because this could be very narcissistic. But Midsummer Night's Dream is one of those plays I think is wonderful both to do and to see. Yeah. So. What about yours? Did you already ask this to other people?
I can't even remember. This will be interesting, because if I did answer this earlier or later, we'll see if I'm actually if it just changes every time. But I will say about Midsummers, I think it's a good lesson for writers, is the idea that structurally you could have ended the play with the fourth act. If the story's about the lovers, you just kind of wrap that up, and you could probably end it. But you don't always have to follow the structure if you've got a really great idea. Like, I think Shakespeare was looking at that and going, why the hell not? Let's put the play at the end. It'll be fun. And everyone loves it. Yeah. And it works. Yeah. For me, I think I've mentioned it before. I really do love Midsummers, in part because it's the only play that it's the only Shakespeare play I've been in. I played Nick Bottom in high school. So that was fun.
I can see that. That. Yeah.
I loved playing Nick, and that was a great part for me, and I really liked it. Othello, also, I agree with you. I think anyone that wants to write a really good villain, Iago becomes a great study in itself, where it's just like really dig into Iago. By
the way, I've read some books that some people theorize that Shakespeare, the biggest role Shakespeare might have played was Iago,
the master puppet. Master, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, maybe he didn't want to sit on the bench the whole time, like, yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Like,
but I think this is going to sound like such a basic answer, but for this week, my answer is Romeo and Juliet. I think it's such a great play, and it's a play that, I heard someone once say that it's seconds away from being a comedy.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I love that part of it, that it's like every time I watch Romeo and Juliet, I still wish it would end differently. Like, it's called The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. And so they're like, you don't look at that and go, oh, this is going to end well. But when it's done right, I'm still thinking it's going to end differently. And I know how it ends. And I'm still like, oh, maybe this time.
Maybe the misunderstanding will be resolved. And yeah,
Every
I'll be
time.
honest. Every time I come in contact with the Midsummer or with Romeo and Juliet, I just want to punch the nurse and the friar in the face.
Oh,
It's the two like adults that give bad advice that I'm like, I always want to punch him in the face, David. I want to punch him in the face.
they
But
are
I think Shakespeare knows
infuriating.
that.
Yeah.
I think Shakespeare knows that. Like I think he's like, yep, youth, and they get on top of that, they get bad advice. How could it not go wrong? Like,
No, so I love that aspect of it. I love that it is a comedy up until it's like, oh, so close. And I love that part of it. I also like Romeo and Juliet because I feel like there's a little bit there for everyone. Like it's very
yeah,
rare to find someone, if they don't enjoy it, it may be just because they want to like take shots at Shakespeare and be like, it's boring. But I'm like, no, it's a fun play. It's exciting. There's fights and drama and melodrama. There's just so much going on there, and yeah, you can just dig really deep into it. So I know that Hamlet is probably the better written play, but Romeo and Juliet, I don't know. I keep coming back to it.
well, there you go. Yeah,
Yeah,
and Romeo and Juliet's in the. It's like one of those name ones.
yeah,
Like when people like, well, what did Shakespeare write? Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet.
yeah.
Othello's on that list. Like, yeah, like it's like the famous ones.
Yeah.
The famous ones. I
And,
thought you
and
were gonna say Pericles.
oh, Pericles, of course. Well, I will say, recently I've been looking at Titus Andronicus, and really it's been kind of just like, oh dear God, like that's really just been my reaction throughout the whole thing. It's like, oh my, this is brutal. Like,
Yeah, that one is unrelenting too, and it's so hard to
so
get a beat on. Uh, you, we didn't mention it, but like the character of Titus Andronicus is hard to find his motivation in that play. Like it's hard to figure out like, well, what does this guy want? He's very like this way and that way the whole time. But it makes me think, here's the thing about Midsummer Night's Dream. There's no like protagonist. Like Hamlet is the protagonist in Hamlet.
yeah,
But a lot of Shakespeare plays don't have a main character that's easily identifiable. It's like a Robert Altman movie. It's like they're very like it's just a group that you may lean for one person or another. Like I guess you could say Midsummer Night's Dream. It's Hermia maybe or
maybe,
Lysander, but like who knows? Like a lot
yeah,
of his plays, it's hard to like get a lot of times when you write nowadays, when I write plays nowadays and I read books about playwriting and stuff, it's always kind of like this character has a motivation and a main want, and they pursue this goal and things like that. But a lot of Shakespeare plays are just like big groups of people that like crisscross.
yeah,
Yeah, I think in Othello, Iago's the more interesting character to me. They always cast like a major actor as Othello,
yeah,
but you gotta bring a heavy hitter to the table for Iago because it's Iago's play.
yeah.
Because he's such a sweet villain. Like you got to have somebody in that role. I love the movie version with Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. But yeah, the Kenneth Branagh, I think, just chews it up. He chews it up. Chews it up. Anyway.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. And then there's so much there for it. I don't know. Well, why don't we call it a day? You and I could probably keep going for hours and hours.
We can talk all day, man. We can talk all day. But yeah, no. Thanks for having me as your bonus video.
Yes, thank you for being here. And for people that would like to know more about your work, I will have information posted in the comments. And so please check out. Now, Brad, I've got your website. Do you have a social media of preference? Do we send people, if people want to follow you?
Yeah.
Am I putting you on the spot here?
Well, you've caught me in a moment in time when I'm like, oh, social media.
Who needs
But
it?
no, I post to Instagram all the time, and I post to Facebook occasionally. So, and at my website, bradmcintyre.com, you can get links to all my social media hoopla.
There we go. Because yeah, I think I would love for people to check out what you're working on, and new things that are coming your way. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. It's been fun to chit chat.